So now we have an idea of what's in atheists' minds when they say God. They're imagining Zeus, Apollo, Wotan, all of these other gods. That's not what's in our minds. But why do atheists then insist that we have the same idea of God in our minds? There's two reasons. The first has to do with Christianity. Christians believe that Jesus, a human being, was God. That he was God's only son, that God sent him to earth to die a painful death full of suffering so that we could be forgiven. Christians say that God loved us so much that he sent his beloved son, who's also God, to die. So the fact that Christians believe in a God that became a human being and died tells us that the idea of God that they have in their minds is similar to the idea of God that the atheists have in their minds. So when atheists, they say that we have monotheists have the same idea of God as all of these other gods, that's a remnant of their response to Christianity. Atheism today is a response to Christianity. So when atheists assume that the God that Christians believe in is like all of those other gods, they might actually have a point. But when they extend it to the God of Islam, the God who's described in the Quran, they don't. They're mistaken. That's why it's really important to remember these 13 attributes. Let's recap. The first kind of attribute is God's existence. God exists necessarily. He doesn't need anything. Everything else, including Jesus, including Apollo or Zeus, if they were to exist, exists contingently. So Christians believe in a God who's contingent. That's why they can believe that Jesus is God and that he died a painful death. The second kind of attribute is God's privative attributes. These attributes describe what God is not. And there's 5 of them. God did not begin to exist. He's beginningless. He does not stop existing. He's endless. He doesn't need anything. He's independent. He does not resemble anything. He's transcendent. And he's one. There's no other God. If you think about Jesus and the God in Christianity, then you'll see that it violates all of these attributes as well. The third category is God's attributes of volitional agency. These are God's life, knowledge, will, and power. Jesus and all of those other gods that the atheists mention have these attributes, but not in the same way that the God of the Quran does, because they have them in a contingent way, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God, has them necessarily. And the fourth kind of attribute is God's hearing, sight, and speech. And again, Jesus and all of those other gods that the atheists mention have these attributes, but not in the same way that the God of the Quran, who's described in the Quran, has these attributes. Because for God, they're necessary, they're not contingent, but for all of these things, they are contingent. So when we talk about God to people who aren't Muslim, to atheists, to Christians, to others, when we try to prove the existence of God, for example, then in order to avoid confusion, it's really important for us to clearly understand and communicate what our conception of God is. Because when someone constructs an argument to prove the existence of a God who doesn't exist necessarily, who isn't independent, who doesn't have all of the attributes that we just saw, Christians do this, then that argument might not be a good argument. And it might not be an argument that we as Muslims should be making.